moth. That probably means change and growth.
No, that would be a butterfly.
So what's a moth?
Death.
Season 2 of The Last of Us is done, and I'm still taking a moment to process because this season started off really strong. At one time I thought this is better than season 1. It got dreadfully bad near the last half of the season. We'll get to that later. On screen, you'll see the layout of the whole season. 7 episodes. Always got on my nerves. Just because I'm weird about odd numbers. I just don't like them.
We kill him slowly.
But those are one of my initial overall gripes of just the amount of filler and how they're obviously trying to drag it out for a season 3. It could be that they really are trying to go for a season 4 and they're already dragging it out. And then season 3 could be another drag out, as this season did focus on Ellie, similar to how last season focused on Joel, but now it's Ellie's story. Next season is going to be Abby's story. Does this mean that season 3 with Abby's story will be also 7 episodes? Are they going to try to drag that out and then get all the way to a season 4? The end of season 2 where Abby has the gun on Ellie and she shoots. We just cut away and then we see Abby indicating the transitioning over to her. People who don't know the games are confused by it. Wasn't explicitly saying, all right, we're going to be Abby now. They just focused on her for about a minute or two, then it was over. That could be a throwaway to a lot of people who don't know the games, thinking, oh, okay, whatever, it's Abby. Next season we'll see Ellie again. But because I know the games, I know that next season is going to be primarily Abby, if not all. Seeing that they've already been talking about going beyond 3 seasons, Neil and Craig both saying that we need more than 3 seasons to tell the whole story, and I don't agree with that. They don't want to end the show. Neil and Craig are both feeling pressure just to keep the show going because it's popular. I'm sure the overall rating for this season is lower than last season. Season 1 of The Last of Us is pretty close to perfect. Actual game changer for the game adaptation genre, considering Minecraft just made like $1 billion in the box office. Season 1 of The Last of Us had a lot to do with that. The quality of acting and the story and everything was just so well put together.
I'm immune!
Whoa, hey!
All right, let's get into some of the big changes that they made from the game to the show. First one I want to address is the relationship between Dina and Joel. They essentially created one. In the games, Dina and Joel pretty much had zero relationship, but here they decided to do that. Even from the get-go of the first episode, there is a little misdirect where somebody walks in on Joel who's fixing something. We assume it's Ellie, but it's actually Dina. It was a choice that I liked. It's one of the big choices that they made that I thought was a good choice, even though I think that they didn't really use it very well. They added this connection between Dina and Joel that we only see for about 5 minutes in episode 1. Then Joel's dead, and for a while Dina seems to care, and then eventually near the end she seems to just stop kind of care. So even though I like the addition of giving Joel and Dina a relationship, they didn't really do much with it, and it kind of was just left put to the wayside after they essentially set it up, and there was really no payoff. Next up, we have Gail, who is a brand new character that they created just for the show. Gail is the wife of Eugene, who is in the games, though you don't actually see him other than a picture. You see a picture of him, and you smoke some of his weed. In the game, Eugene was already dead. He died of a stroke. In the show, he dies at the hands of Joel. We all love Catherine O'Hara. Catherine O'Hara's great. If you want to make your show just a little better, sprinkle a little Catherine O'Hara on there, but she was just there to be an expository tool. Essentially, she was kind of whatever story tool they needed at the time, they would just bring her up. We need somebody to say something impactful and philosophical
So let's give it to Gail. Let's have a scene with Gail and Tommy watching baseball in the field just to hear her say what we all know out loud. It's kind of a throwaway character. It was kind of a letdown of who she was. Like in the trailers, they were kind of almost setting her up as if she was an enemy of some sort. It made it look like that. Even though in the trailers it was clear that she was a therapist, there was something about it that made me think, well, maybe she's actually bad, or she becomes bad, become a god to other people, similar to the Seraphites and how they pray to this god of this woman. They just had her there. They had one scene with her and Joel, a fully expository scene of "you killed my husband and I hate," and we eventually get to see why Joel killed Jean. Gail as a character really didn't feel all that necessary. It almost feels like they didn't really use her enough. Will she even be in season 3 at all if season 3 is going to be majority just Abby's story? I doubt we'll even see her at all next season. She was essentially just there. Whatever the writers needed at the moment, they essentially would just put Gail in there and be like, all right, somebody needs to say this. We need this bit of information to be dropped out. We need this bit of character backstory to be revealed. Let's bring in Gail. Another relationship change they made was the relationship between Ellie and Tommy, barely even mentionable in the games. Here I also love the change of seeing her and Tommy practicing her sniping, and I love that moment just to see how Tommy has taken her under his wing just like he would with his own actual niece, and showing her the ropes, showing her how to shoot. They're taking her off patrol, and we all know it's because they hint at that there is an issue between them throughout the entire season. It takes until like the second last episode for them to finally say it out loud. Again, I'm trying to wonder what it's like for people who don't know the games at all and were wondering, okay, why are Ellie and Joel fighting? What actually happened? At the end of season 1, you know what happened. We did, even though Joel never said it out loud until later on. Tommy and Ellie, I loved it, and I just kind of wish there was more to it. They only had one little small moment again near the end of the season.
It's about New Year's Eve and, the kid.
But a change that I ultimately thought was a bad idea overall was the development of Dina and Ellie's relationship. Now in the games, it's similar to what happens in the show, but it's way more subtle in a lot of moments. Specifically after they leave Jackson to go look for Joel, as the relationship within Jackson was pretty similar to the games, but then once they leave, kind of too close in a way that I thought was dangerous for their situation. Later on, we get that reveal that Dina is pregnant, and yes, it is definitely Jesse's kid. Dina and Ellie were even talking in a tent like a bunch of schoolgirls. Silly high school flirty shit. Isabella Merket's best episode in terms of acting, episode 4, I believe it was, where Ellie gets bit, Dina freaks out and is like, well, now I have to kill you. The way that it goes from one moment to Dina being just about ready to shoot Ellie, and then Dina saying, I'm pregnant, and then all of a sudden they're making out. That whole moment was just bizarre. They go through these crazy whirlwind of emotions within like 2 seconds. In the games, the first time they kiss like that, it's a way more chill moment where they're just sitting around with Eugene's weed, and they're just there chilling, smoking really old weed. Then they just kind of start kissing, but in the show, they like jump on each other, and it's at a weird moment. And I remember Dina was holding a lantern, and she just kind of drops it, and I'm like, isn't that kind of dangerous? What if the lantern blows up and you all burn to death? That was a change that I would outright say was a mistake. Every other change, you could have done more with it, but this one I thought just made there be a new level of a dynamic between Dina and Ellie that didn't work for their situation. And it ended up making their relationship more childish in a way. At the same time, almost inappropriate-ish, considering that, and they should have just kept it way more, the way they handled their relationship in the game was way more subtle. Though, of course, in the game, they do have way more time to develop that. And in the show, they're trying to develop it within, a 7-episode season, and they only really spent about 1 or 2 episodes on that. And then another change they made that I was not a fan of, kind of a major change for a character, was Jesse. In the games, Jesse is a lot more erratic and not as responsible in a way. And the show Jesse is very stiff. We're already done with Jesse, unfortunately, unless there's going to be flashbacks next season. I don't think young Mazzino was given enough to work with. He's a great actor. I saw him in Beef, and I liked him in Beef. He didn't have a whole lot to do, and he was almost annoyingly grown up. He's around the same age as Ellie and Dina. They're already setting it up that he was essentially next in line or in the line to be one of the leaders of Jackson later on. He's already part of the council. She was almost too responsible in a way, and even in the end, the same thing still happens to him. They kind of give him this pretty big personality change from the game. In the end, he just ends up dying the same way. That's a pretty major change towards his character that I thought. Every other character is pretty similar to how they are in the games, but Jesse was pretty drastic. One last little section before I finally get on to the episodes. There were some setups that didn't really go anywhere earlier on. Specifically in episode 1, they had a moment where Ellie is fighting a clicker, and the clicker is way smarter than the average one. And she talks about it at a council after, but then again, it's never brought up ever again. They should be more worried about the fact that the clickers are getting more advanced. It gets mentioned once, and that's it. We never see any other clickers in that sense for the rest of the episode. And even similar to last season, there wasn't that many big moments with the clickers. There was that one big action sequence in episode 2, and that was essentially it. We saw a sprinkled one here and there, not that many more than there were last season. So they had the setup with the smart clicker, and that didn't go anywhere. And then there was also this new thing that they invented for the show, similar to the hive mind idea from last season, where essentially had that every single clicker is connected through this fungus in a way, so they all have the kind of hive mind. There's a moment they had in episode 2 where Abby lands on a bunch of snow, and apparently there's clickers underneath it. So they essentially just invent this idea of like, well, the clickers were hibernating under the snow. That's not a thing that they did in the games. Not hibernating in a way. It made it sound like they're essentially just down there waiting to attack. Unless every single clicker is just intelligent now, like this one. I don't really get the idea behind that. Are they saying that the clickers, even though with the hive mind, are able to sit underneath the snow for however long, lie underneath dead clickers, which isn't going to give them any type of warmth because they're dead and they're in the snow. They use that as some type of reasoning. Jesse tells Ellie about it. Yeah, they hide underneath the snow to stay warm or something. And that's just a dumb throwaway explanation. Another thing that they added that honestly they didn't need to add.
They're using their own dead like insulation.
That's not in the games, and it really wasn't necessary at all.
Because here's what we got. He's a smuggler. His name's Joel or Joe.
All right, well, let's finally get into the episodes themselves. Starting with episode 1, Future Days, where we open on the giraffes, which we saw from season 1. We're connecting back to season 1 immediately with the giraffes, though this time it's from Abby's point of view. I was always curious with how they were going to begin the season. I was wondering if they're going to go with Abby right away or Ellie. Yeah, they did a tiny flashback from the end of season 1. We don't know who she is yet. As much as I'm trying to not say, because I played the games, I know what happened. But because I played the games, I knew who she was immediately. And anyone else who did would know immediately. But people who probably weren't following the entire production like a huge nerd like I am. So anyone who doesn't know the games is watching the scene wondering, okay, who are these people? Why are they talking? But then why are they talking about Joel? Why do they want to go after Joel? We don't find out the answer to that question until the next episode. It isn't that hard to tell. She's upset about the death of someone. She bends down at a cross, and we still don't see the name on the cross of who it is. She just puts a Firefly tag there, and then that's it. So we're left wondering, who is this woman? But then we just cut to 5 years later, because for reasonings that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, from this moment here, it took them 5 years to get to Jackson. I'm pretty sure it doesn't take anyone 5 years to get across America. Essentially, the two locations are Seattle and Wyoming. That's where Abby and Wolf are at Seattle, and Jackson is in Wyoming. I don't know America. I don't know the geography of the country, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't take 5 years to get across the country. So I'm still waiting for an explanation on that, because they never explained it, and it's always bugged the crap out of me the entire season. Why did it take them 5 years? But I digress. I knew right away that she wasn't really fighting a guy, some random guy, even though it was a pretty rough fight. Ellie was having a training fight with this guy who doesn't have a name in the show. It doesn't take long for us to learn that, yeah, it's just her having fun, quote unquote fun. We see that Ellie is way more accomplished now in terms of hand-to-hand combat, which is something that they did not focus on in the last season. So this episode introduces the changes they made, some of the major changes, most notably Dina and Joel's relationship, but then also Ellie and Tommy's relationship, and then the introduction of Gail. In the entire season, this is her only real episode where we get to see her for about a solid 10-minute scene with Joel. She's also, like I mentioned before, very underutilized character. Still, it almost felt like she was almost not phoning it in, but even though she was still good, she was just kind of like worked there for like a week, shot a couple scenes, and she was done. When her and Dina go out on going on their security round, they still don't listen. Dina and Ellie go off on their own, and they end up getting into shit. They're both troublemakers. As you can see them, they're kind of dynamic with Jesse because they're all three of them are friends, and Dina and Jesse used to date, or they're very off and on apparently. But we can see that they're very impetuous, but we also already see the connection between them. But pacing wise, it was a good episode. It filled in all the spaces. There was no filler, even though I'm going to say the word filler maybe a lot more later. But it jam-packed a lot of stuff in there. I mean, we had that one moment with Ellie and Joel to show how strained their relationship has become, considering that the town is essentially talking about it, like, oh, what's wrong with Joel and Ellie? Why are they fighting? And even Dina wants to know. She's asking Joel. They don't talk about it until the very end of the season. Things have changed. Things have become strained. They also added this new, with the addition of the hive mind, they had this addition of the fungus essentially crawling through these pipes that lead into the town. The connection from this fungus pipes to the clickers is what attracts them to Jackson. What attracts them to Jackson in next episode. I just made a rhyme. I am a poet and I did not know it. Overall, a great episode, a great introduction episode, and I believe it was a strong start to the season.
You. Stupid.
Now, episode 2 was the highlight of the entire season for me personally, and probably for a lot of other people. This was a great episode, and it was also the one that answered the question to me of how long are they going to go until they kill Joel? I knew it was going to happen, and I wondered if they would stretch it out to the end of the season or mid-season, but no, they went for it in episode 2. And it was pretty similar to the game, even with dialogue and even with how Abby used a golf club to beat on Joel. But this was the only almost purely Abby episode of the entire season. We get to see her, we get to see how tenacious and determined she is, regardless of anything, to get her revenge on Joel. And with episode 1 ending with him finding Jackson after taking 5 years to get there. So then we find them held up in a ski lodge that apparently no one in Jackson has ever seen, even though it's just outside the town. Yet for some reason, no one seems to know that it's there. Or maybe they do and they don't care, but I'm pretty sure if they did know that was there, they would be using it for something. It'd be a good lookout tower spot. The highlight of this episode was the attack on Jackson from the horde of clickers, which is not in the games whatsoever. Absolute highlight of the entire season. Highlight for Gabriel Luna's character, who was spectacular, and I was actually a little bummed to see that Gabriel wasn't in the show much at all after episode 3, really. So that was a bummer because I was really loving his performance. From episode 1 and 2, I thought Kaylin and Gabriel should get Emmys. Considering this season overall is nowhere near as good as season 1, I don't really see anyone getting nominated for any acting awards. But the assault on Jackson from the clickers was very exciting, as they set that up in the end of last episode with Sparkler. Of all things, they're using a sparkler to essentially have the fungus find it that's in the pipe, and that triggers all these clickers that are nearby to attack Jackson when Abby is trying to maneuver her way around the ice cold mountain. After she sees someone on a horse, she tries to go after them, and then she falls down the side of a mountain, lands on this pile of dead clickers, and then all the live ones just come up out of the ground in that stupid new idea that really made no sense. But it was still a cool scene, nonetheless, of them coming up out of the ground. They just go hog wild bananas and go after Jackson, giving me major Helm's Deep, Lord of the Rings, Two Tower vibes with the attack. Or maybe that was Return of the King. I forget which one it was. And Tommy was just taking control and taking out clickers left, right, and center. And they also had dogs. Again, in the games, they didn't even have this big, huge attack moment. That was a whole new thing. It took up a huge bulk of the episode. Essentially, they were switching back between that and Abby trying to escape from these clickers. Joel is the one who ends up saving them. She doesn't know it's Joel right away, obviously. Well, Joel just ran inside after narrowly escaping a horde of clickers, so Dina is just making sure he didn't die. But of course, Abby hears the name of Joel, and wow, a good acting moment for Caitlin Dever and the subtleness of how she just kind of looks up, realizing that that's Joel. They end up at the ski lodge, and a lot of that is similar to the games, even with the moment where when she shoots him in the leg with a shotgun, the way he falls forward. Though I kind of thought that they were going to drag out the scene of him getting beaten on a little longer. Even though I knew it was coming, it was still pretty upsetting, and I'm so curious to know of what anyone who doesn't play the games thought of what happened. Were they devastated? Did they freak out? Did they cry and they say, how dare they kill Pedro, who's like, you know, the most beloved actor in the world right now? It was definitely a very tense episode, especially with how they overlapped what was happening at the ski lodge with Abby versus what was happening in Jackson. Tommy has this really awesome face-off with a bloater, as they call it, the bigger ones that are way bigger than all the other clickers, with a flamethrower moment that ends up being a little anticlimactic. They have this dramatic showdown moment, just going at it with the flamethrower. Tommy just ends up running out of fuel as one would happen, and then we think, well, Tommy is not going to die, obviously, because they have these moments all the time and they don't ever actually die. I'm thinking, okay, how are they going to get out of this? And the bloater just ends up dying. So it was on fire already, and they almost made it seem like it was immune to fire, but then suddenly, no, it's not, and it eventually died. A slightly anticlimactic moment, but also a huge hit for Jackson. We barely see Jackson at all after this episode. There isn't a whole lot of action in Jackson, there we go again, after this episode. At this point in the show, I was starting to think this might actually be better than season 1, because this was a stellar episode, I thought. I personally think this is one of the best episodes of the show, period, including the first season. Unfortunately, this would be essentially the high note of the entire season. It doesn't go down drastically right away, but it does slowly go down and then kind of slightly up. But this was definitely the best episode of the season, and when they finally got to the moment with Joel, it was pretty upsetting. Considering I knew it was going to be happening, I can't imagine how much upsetting it would be to someone who didn't know what was happening.
Give Sarah my love.
As the end of the last episode with Jesse and Dina and Ellie leaving on horses with Joel's body trailing behind, I was wondering, okay, is that what they're going to do? Are they going to be showing them walking into Jackson and Tommy's going to see them? But no, they decided to open with them in the quote-unquote morgue, or whatever they consider to be a morgue. Tommy coming in and just sitting next to Joel. And it's this really emotional moment. And again, we see how just stellar Gabriel Luna is. He was so thinking good. I was excited to watch the rest of the season, thinking, all right, I'm going to get to watch more of this. But we barely get to see any of Gabriel after this episode until near the end, when Tommy just looks at Joel and says, give Sarah my love. Such a short line, but so completely heartbreaking, considering what happened with Sarah, obviously, in the beginning of last season. How obviously devastating that was, and now Tommy is without a brother and a niece. So now he has his surrogate niece, Ellie. And this was another moment where I thought this would further strengthen the relationship between Ellie and Tommy, but pretty much we barely see them together for the rest of the season, other than that last moment where Ellie is essentially trying to get Tommy's approval for them to just go and get their revenge. But in the games, Tommy was more so against it. Tommy was against Ellie and Dina going, and he made it seem like he was against the idea. And he basically set Ellie up and was like, all right, let's just wait till tomorrow and we'll talk to Maria and figure that out. But then Tommy just ends up bouncing in the middle of the night. He goes off by himself, and in the show, he doesn't leave at all. But he does have a kid. We can't really blame him for that, for wanting to leave Jackson, for not wanting to leave Jackson. But I feel like the entire community hall moment where Ellie is trying to convince them that we need to go get revenge, but she's also asking for like a lot of people, which I actually agree with some lady in the crowd. I'm not sure who she is. She's nameless, but she straight up just says, can we afford to let that many people go right now, considering what just happened? And she makes a good point. But Ellie tries to state her case, and they end up voting her down for the idea. We all know that's not going to matter. She goes anyways. But I also do love the short little moment here with Bella and Catherine O'Hara. I don't know what it was, but I just love seeing both of them on camera together. But they have this small moment of where Gail knows that Ellie's just full of shit. Pretty much all the time she opens her mouth, she's just straight up lying, but she just goes along with it. I have to give you a clean bill of health, and even though I know you're full of poo, I'm just going to do it anyways. There was a particularly heartbreaking moment where Ellie goes back into Joel's house where she did used to live, and we see some flashbacks of that later on, but a really heartbreaking moment of her just walking around the house, and the moment where she actually finds his coat and smells it, which is directly out of the games, but also reminds me a lot of Brokeback Mountain, and I'm wondering if that's where the games got it from. A very, very sad moment. And that definitely made me cry to see Ellie crying her eyes out with the moment where she takes Joel's coat and just kind of hugs it. And it's a very sad moment. Until we get our first look at the Seraphites. For anyone who doesn't know the games, again, they're seeing this and they're wondering, okay, who are these people? The Seraphites are just people who live in the woods and they use whistles to indicate, to signal each other so they don't talk out loud. And they don't use any type of technology. They just wear, as you can see, they just, all them, for reasons that I've never fully understood, all the men have shaved heads and the women don't. But even though this is the first time seeing, it's a pretty short moment, and they straight up just give out the story of the whistles, this man and this girl who I don't know if they're dad and daughter, and then suddenly they are about to be attacked and they run off to the side of the path, and then that's kind of it. But this is our first look at the Seraphites, and they're pretty game accurate in terms of their look and whatnot. Though I feel overall, just in the season in general, the Seraphites were underutilized a lot more than what I expected, even more than how they set it up in the trailer. It seemed like they might have been in it a lot more than they ended up being. But I can definitely see them being in the next season a lot more. The fact that Abby has direct interaction with them, just like Ellie did. Even though in the games, Ellie did not get captured and hung up, which happens later on, it sets them up to be basically just human beings who decide to live a certain way. Then later on in the episode, when Ellie and Dina come across all the dead Seraphites, Dina just ends up throwing up at seeing all these dead bodies, and right away I'm like, all right, she's pregnant. I didn't remember that from the games, but the fact that I'm sure she's seen lots of gross stuff already, her throwing up like that was a little bit suspect. I figured, well, she must be pregnant, and yeah, we learn later on that she is. They are making their way off to Seattle. Zoom ahead and look at Seattle and see that the WLF, or the Wolves, are there, and they're essentially just a militia that controls all or most of Seattle. So this episode started off pretty strong, and I found it tapered off a bit near the end, and this was the point of the show where it was starting to get a little weak, though I still thought that the next episode, episode 4, was a strong episode, and then after that, it dropped sharply.